Okay, so today I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to tell you a story, but I'm also going to talk about the concept of openness and listening and vision quest. Three things that Paul mentioned in his talk, really briefly. One in an interview that he gave about the vision quest, and then just the concept of openness in Cascadia and the bioregional work that we do through the Cascadia Poetic Slab, or the Seattle Poetic Slab, and with the Cascadia Poetry Festival. And then this, really the practice of listening is what I want to talk about as something that's fundamental to my own writing practice and my concept of what it means to be a poet here, a poet who thinks about bioregion and place as having life, not just like a place you go and you live in or you inhabit, but a place that actually has a sense of being on its own and a sense of life. Something that you can hear if you can listen to it, if you can open up to listening to it. So I'm originally not from this bioregion. In fact, I'm from the Southwest in New Mexico. I grew up in northern New Mexico on this ranch in the mountains of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. And if you look at the map of the Rockies and they come down all the way into the very northern part of New Mexico and they hook. And right in that hook, there's a break which a freeway runs through. But on the other side of the hook is where I grew up, just like in that little mountain range on the other side of the hook, which has now become, I think, a playground for people who live in Santa Fe, like an outdoor playground. At least that's the way Outside Magazine has been marketing it for several years now. So there's some good things, I'm sure, that come out of that, and some really annoying things if you grew up there. So growing up there when I was young, we were a relatively new family. We'd been there for a long time, but there were families that had been there for hundreds of years. So we were always kind of outsiders in this culture of northern New Mexico. And northern New Mexico is kind of a really particular place because there's just places that were cut off from the rest of New Mexico. So the Spanish that you hear, really elderly people speaking in the mountains, is this sort of hybridized medieval Spanish, right? So if you hear it, if somebody who speaks contemporary Spanish hears it, they're like, why are you talking to me? It's like if someone came in the room and started talking to you like they were, Shakespeare in 16th century English or something. That's kind of what this sort of mountain New Mexican Spanish is like. So I grew up in a really different bioregion, and I've been living here since 2005. I visited several times, but I started living here in 2005, and I came for graduate school, but there is some truth to the fact that I came for other reasons as well, for reasons of just my personhood, my being, and sense of who I want to be and what I want to be doing in the world. So it was more spiritual than anything. And in fact, I came from for the PhD program in English at the University of Washington, and my other choice was UPenn. And when I would tell people that in my program, they'd be like, what? Why would you go to the University of Washington when you could have went to UPenn? And I said, well, it was a really easy question when my partner and I asked ourselves the question of would you rather be gay in Philadelphia or Seattle? Really, really easy question. So it's I don't know. I guess we're going to Seattle. And it's just, absolutely beautiful to be in this bioregion in the mountains. I was already exploring the mountains in Northern California when I was living in the Bay Area, and just going further north and deeper into the mountains. So the mountains have always been very, very important to me since I was a young child. I used to sneak out at night and go for really long hikes in the middle of the night, with just this little pocket knife, and I made this little deer leather pouch that I had 2 pieces of flint in and some emergency fishing gear, which was basically fishing line and hooks, right? So I went real rogue, and I would just climb up into the canyons. I was probably started doing this when I was about 6 years old. So it makes me a little nervous that my mom might see this and think about what I did. Mom, do not look me up on the internet, and don't listen to my talks. So from an early age, I think my grandmother knew I had been sneaking out and doing these things, and on occasion I would take my mother's, she had a an Easy Bake Oven from the 1970s. I don't know if you remember these Easy Bake Ovens. And they had these like little aluminum pots and pans. Well, I would take an aluminum pan with me and dig up like wild potatoes and purslane and cook them up on a little campfire and maybe catch a fish. And so I would like eat really well when I was on these epically long hikes. But I think my grandmother knew that I had been sneaking out, and she knew I wasn't like other girls. So she really wanted to help me, I think, harness my energy and potential, right? And so instead of just letting me roguishly sneak out into the mountains at night and go on these, like, I don't know, overnight adventures, I don't even really know what to call them, she decided to send me on a vision quest, which was not typical to do for girls. And so it was kind of a little bit of a secret between us. But she gave me some instructions on what to do, not very many, because it was my quest. These are going to be my visions, so it was my thing to do. I think I was about 7 years old at this point, and she sent me with a jug of water, and that's it. And told me to find a place that I really wanted to be, that I felt comfortable, that I felt safe. On one of my hikes, find a place and sit down and listen and be with the earth, be with the animals, and be with the plants. And this happened at night, and the goal was for me to stay up all night doing this, just sitting there in the mountains, in the middle of I don't know where, listening to the animals around me, and ideally like the plants and the water, I don't know what else, the sky, anything. And so I decided, sure, I'm going to go off and do this thing that my grandmother's telling me to do, right? And I remember her saying, just like, if you feel scared, touch the earth. Put your hand in the earth and touch the earth and ground yourself. And I was like, okay, I guess I'll do that, So I did take my pocket knife with me, just in case, right? And I hiked pretty high up into the canyons, and I found a spot, and the moon wasn't full, but it was very bright. And I sat there in just in this like thick area of trees, and I really wanted to be near the trees. So I sat there for like hours. I was cold, but I didn't move, and I drank very little water. I drank almost nothing from the water that I brought with me, and I sat there and just tried to listen to everything. And at one point, I think probably very early in the morning, I really started to feel like I was connecting with the earth and the trees and the plants and the insects and the animals. And initially I had been scared by the animal sounds, but once I didn't die and there were animal sounds around me, I wasn't scared anymore. I was like, oh, I've been sitting here for a long time and there's animals doing their own thing around me, and I'm here fine, just fine, doing what I'm doing. So I just, listening and feeling like I was getting more and more connected to the earth. At one point I felt like I could hear the insects, like the ants crawling around on the ground, and I was watching them do their things for I don't know how long. It felt like a very, very long time. And then it got so intense, all the noises of the night. And the night is very, very noisy. I think especially in the high desert, it's very noisy. I just felt like I could really hear plants actually growing. Whether or not that's true, my experience of it was so that I was probably basically kind of tripping in the mountains in the middle of the night on this my own journey and exploration with the earth, and my own sense of just trying to practice this art of listening. And in order to do that, I had to sit there long enough that I felt like I was almost not quite in my body, but I was in my body. There was a sense of emptying myself out in order to be able to absorb the things around me and to be able to really be so focused on listening to the noises that I could feel as if I was hearing plants grow and stretch out of the ground. So it was a very intense experience for me. And, I came home, I was very tired on the hike home. I was very thirsty, I was very hungry, and I just kind of felt very energetic and elated in a strange way. It felt like, I also grew up Catholic, so it felt like what I was supposed to be feeling in church but never really felt. I don't know if that makes sense. So this idea of practicing listening to things is something I still do today in various formats. Sometimes I go for a really long, hard trail run in the mountains, and part of what that does for me is it just quiets everything and puts me in a sense, like in a place where I'm not thinking. I'm just being, or I'm just doing, I'm acting. So that gets me there. It's like a little bit of a way to short circuit it. Other times I just wake up in the middle of the night and sit there, just like when I was a kid. Just sit there. Sometimes I go out in the backyard. Sometimes I do it in the house. Sometimes if I'm camping or backpacking, I do it in the mountains. And my luckiest times, I do it in the mountains. And I still go on night hikes with some frequency. I still do several night hikes a year. And sometimes my friends are really tortured by that. They're like, I don't want to go hiking with you anymore. Going hiking at night is scary. And I'm like, it is. I really very much like that aspect about it. So I started writing some poems with using this practice of listening. And it was very interesting to enter the state because sometimes there's too many things going on, or there's noise in my ear from something else, and I can't write these poems. And I don't usually have that experience, but these poems in particular are like that because there's a kind of focused listening that I have to be doing. About 2 weeks ago, I was working on these poems, and for some reason, something really noisy with a lot of sound was coming in, and suddenly I just spit out these 4 other poems that were very sound-based and rhythmic and rhyming with tons of alliteration and assonance and wordplay that had no relationship to these poems, but I couldn't return to these poems until I got those poems out of my ear. It was a very particular moment that happened, and a particular experience that doesn't always happen. But that one, these just for some reason, my head needs to just be clear, and I have to be in a state of being, and then I'm not quite sure how they come out, but they do come out like this. So I'm gonna read from this series of poems. I think one of the other things that was mentioned in Paul's talk was seriality, right? And this is a serial poem. So the first part of it is called Imperialism as Sweet as Insult. But I'm not going to be reading that section today. The section I'm going to be reading from is called, I'm forgetting it. And it's a good title, I guess, for today. So the section I'm going to be reading from is called The Possibilities of Verbs in Love. I love verbs, by the way. It's probably my favorite part of speech, and one of my favorite parts about poems is what you can do with verbs in poems. Okay, so I should run my water up here now. All right. Oh, thank you. Sure. So nice. I specifically got this because I forgot my water, and I was like, oh, I'm going to get parched mouth up there. Okay. Possibilities of verbs in love. To strike a match of starlets above a rock, night falls in a parable, somewhat cracked. Deliberately flying rock or entire space rock shower, you wouldn't wait another 60 particles in verb forms. Love is an empire of signs, a bolt of lightning, a fabric of hot breath. Constellations no one could paint, the wearing and destroying of flowers. Becoming, intransitive verb, all hot, bottled up, with expectation, sapient expectation. Call me rampant love, lovesick slave, or wounded bird. Call me inimical, or 7:30. If you come to the library, I apologize. Love is transportation. The theaters of everywhere, like invisible circuits, connecting and deciding if poetry. These are all very short as well. I don't know who's ever going to publish them with like this few words on a page, but someone will fall in love one day with these. You're a sequence in books everywhere. You belong to the whispers whipping the air around the ear like envious. Metonymy in motion like a crumbling alphabet and the qualifications for love. The laws of memory and vanity, from gravity and aphasia, undesired remembering, babbling out of a brook. The universe holds time for one of us to change teams. Flakes gently all over the frozen greens of meadows and urban lawns. Temperature dropping, as is the heart beating, life out of earth. Gray, beige veins, ghosting like moth wings, curling edges of maple leaves drying. I'm so sad about the stars tonight, crawling and quashing. I didn't know there was such a thing, implicating the syllables and raining sentences. The motor of the poem, like a mother's tongue, mile after mile, the black sky softens. All that was exchanged, all the chances taken, all the things are lost, all the violent feelings, all the perfect rules, all the things are broken, and all the technical jargon, and all the politicized bodies, all the magic in the multiverse. So much sprawling about the habits of engineers. No one cared for the bridge, made uncertain among the rocks and old subjects. Gobs of language about tall walls and one large bird to examine, if ever, a meteorite incandescent night. You have to climb really high up into the mountains, I feel like, to see that sometimes. Imperfect blue honesty, cornflower blue blooms, a complex cellular formation, so legendary, so gently full of enterprise. Syllables like rain, short-circuiting the throat, sparkles into particles. The spinning of the earth was all but a surprise burlesque, even Arctic hurt and wayward breezes. The city breathes, cool mint, imperial fog, just to tell you about the moving moon. Speak better of lost everything, beautiful. In the end, there was such a thing, breath-pressed, incessant, iridescent. That much algebra I know, for the letting of love to deliver you in meaning like the aqualung of a fish that begins to coalesce. We speak in undead poems, the answers warble-garble, spores of spontaneity. How she feels inside, how the blizzard cools, how the weather patterns, how the turbulent fog, how the Monterey coast, how rocky in my thoughts, how I get so sick, how it feels so tranquil, how I melt the ice, and how I know for sure the artichokes are blooming. The stopping of love, such a logical thing, such a violent hinge, might amplify another logic of love, impulsive love, thoughtless love, the mechanics of love. All the modified breaths, all the way out, in all the coming and going, in all the back-breaking sweat. How the moonless night, in all the lonely streets, and how mutable are you? Your horoscope, a melancholy limerick, like corporate Thursday, forever unsatisfied. Discrepancies are answers of the heart. Immediate scene, mobbing the sky from sleep and long ago nights. Still suspicion made a certain sense. Like a mountain from the night, romance as a disheveled form of lust, in the most midnight of places, in memoriam quatrains. Eating apples is not a feminist statement, nor is it anti-American. I just feel like that's going to be, something like that is going to be in the news soon, that somehow eating apples is like not American, it's anti-American to eat apples. Someone will say that sometime, and it'll be terrible. Okay, so that's it for me. That's my presentation and my poetry reading. So I guess we can, if you guys have any questions, I can be ready for that. Yeah.
Thank you so much for that, and I was really struck by the story that you told of your vision quest as a young girl, and I was just curious whether you still do that, and have you done it here in our bioregion, and how that,
I have, in fact, done that in our bioregion, and I honestly, the first time I did it, I got lost on a trail run, which
Where
is,
were you?
I was in I think I was in the Issaquah Alps, was it? No, what is that area off of like North Bend, up in the mountains, like right there? So I think I just went up like in that area off like exit, it's like by Lake Olali and Pratt River and that whole area. It's maybe like off exit 47 or 37 off the 90. And I just went for a trail run and I got lost. And getting lost is one of my favorite ways to explore an area, but when you are not prepared to be lost, that can be, really challenging. So I did do that there, and part of the reason I did it was so I would just stop panicking and find my way home. So it was a long day and night. But I did make it back to camp at some point. So, and part of the reason that it was longer is because I spent time just sort of experiencing where I was and attempting to listen to where I was at and look at the trees and feel the flow of the water and sort of be in tune with where I was. So it seemed like a really good idea to come down from the panic. I've done it a couple times actually, now that I think about it. So some more intentional than others. Yeah.
I'm so struck by this notion of trust, trusting not only yourself, but trusting the connection with the bioregion. And I was I came to Seattle 2 weeks ago. I live in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And I was with a friend of mine named Sherman Bitsui, who's a Dene poet.
Mm-hmm.
And 2 weeks ago, we had a tremendous rainstorm. So Sherman was driving with me, and he's from the desert. He was just like hunched, and just the water was just anti-Sherman.
Yeah.
He could not handle it at all. So I was so struck by what you said about water as an indication of compassion, or an element of compassion. And I was curious if you could speak to that idea as somebody coming from New Mexico into this rainy place.
There's so many ways I could speak to that. First of all, I'm a triple water sign, so I'll start there. But actually, one of the things this other poetry project I have going on right now is exploring this figure of La Llorona, who's this, I don't know if you are familiar with the story, so you are familiar with the story. And what I've been doing is sort of exploring, and the way I came to this, like this is something that belongs as a tale that belongs in the Southwest, and in Mexico, Central America, all the way down into South America as well. But I came to re-envision this through being here in this bioregion and because of the water. I used to look at Gary Snyder's book, Rivers and Mountains Without End, and I was like, bullshit. Like, these rivers are fucking finite and they end. But then when I moved here, I was like, oh. I could see how he was like tripping on that and being like, these are huge rivers and they just don't end. Totally different time period. But that difference between being in the Southwest, you're like, the Rio Grande ends there, and like looking at these rivers as huge, and seemingly endless was really a huge thing for me to consider. And then thinking about a lot of the activism that goes around here with, fossil fuels and pipelines being built, which is really quite amazing. And some of the stands that this bioregion has taken against fossil fuels sort of all led me to think about this concept of what we do to the waters and who would possibly be a witness to that. And who better than La Llorona, this like woman who's like has this bad rap, has been treated poorly, her story's been like malformed over generations and generations. But if there's one thing that everyone's agreed on, it's that she's been in the water for like hundreds, if not thousands of years, right? So who better to witness what we've been doing to the water than La Llorona as a figure? So then I started reimagining her as a water protector. And now I'm exploring this. And this is like hugely an influence of being in this bioregion and working with the Seattle Poetics Lab and thinking about watersheds as defining a place, right? The other thing for me that's particularly interesting is the way that bioregions challenge like nation and state boundaries, right? Like the water, it's just not going to give a crap about your nation's boundary or your state's boundary, nor is the air. These things are they just move whether you want them to or not. So thinking about the ways that water like carves places out for us and unites us and differentiates us with different water basins and watersheds and things like that can really make places vastly different. The Southwest, the animals and the trees are so different there than they are here. The climate is so different. When I went to graduate school at the University of Michigan the first time I went, and I studied with these Ojibwe women and took these like blood mystery classes, like these feminine divine blood mystery classes. Like it was really amazing. But one thing that I could never handle was the humidity because of my desert pores. So probably like Sherwin, I was just like, holy crap, completely dysfunctional. And I would just like look at my friends who were from the region, in that area in the Midwest, and they had these like really big pores that would just open up when it got humid, and their skin would get all soft and glowy. And my pores have like these really tiny, tight desert pores from like my family being in the desert for centuries, and they just like clench up and repel water. So I just like look like wet and gross, just like don't touch me, I can't cool down. It's just like a really terrible situation. But these things are like really, they matter in our perspective and our experiences. So anytime I can bring them together and think about just sort of different ways that happens. And my La Llorona poems and that exploration is really awesome. I've managed to track her to these like two goddesses, one of which was actually a water protector. So now I'm like looking to sort of uncover the thread of narrative where she got like this malformed story of this horrible mother who drowns her own kids. So we'll see what I can do with that. So yeah, I think I got to head to Mexico first off. So, yeah. Thank you.
I really appreciated your talk, and I have a question. I have a lot of questions. And I also wanted to say that I would take a night hike with you.
Yeah.
So I'm looking for someone.
Yeah, I'm always looking for people who want to go night hiking.
Have you written about your grandmother was one of my questions, because she sounded remarkable.
She was a remarkable woman. She was also a very damaged woman, and she's probably one of the hardest subjects for me to write about. I sometimes write poems about her, especially when she was young, because she used to walk all over New Mexico. Mm-hmm. And some of the greatest knowledge about the land I got from her. And it was really interesting because, like, there's so much violence in my family. And my grandfather, he's from, like, he has a lot of Spanish blood in him from Spain. In New Mexico, people are really messed up about wanting to keep those bloodlines pure. My grandfather was one of those people, but he married my grandmother, who's, like, very indigenous and just, like, mixed at the border, you know. And he would oppress all that knowledge. You know, he would shame her for it, and things like this. So in my very upbringing, I felt like I was witnessing this like literal reenactment of colonialism, right there. You know, I'm like, oh my gosh, it's like the story of La Llorona right here in front of me. She has this horrible husband who's like a total dick, you know, and at the same time, like, he's my grandfather and he's really awesome to me, but I'm watching this happen. So I have a really hard time writing about her, but when I do, it helps me to, like, think about, like, that moment and just sort of, like, see her in that way. And then it helps me get back to just, like, these really sweet times that we had together when she would take me all around the ranch and the mountains. You know, we used to go, I think, you know, people, like, are really into having pine nuts in their fancy pasta dishes and things like that, and it's, like, really expensive and, like, super bougie thing to do. I grew up, like, around a lot of piñon trees. That's what we call them in New Mexico, piñon. And there was just, like, right across the road we would go, and my grandma would show us, like, the best grove of piñon trees, and we would get, like, these 50-pound sacks of potato sacks full of them, you know. So when I moved to California and I took biology, and my biology teacher was like, these are rare, let me tell you about genetics, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, these are not rare, they're everywhere. She was like, you are lying. And I was like, you're lying. It was like, it was terrible. But so I do write about her sometimes, and like some of the walks that we would go on, and the plants that she would show me. There's one plant in particular that I just want to find so bad. She used to make this tea that was so delicious, and we could only get it wild, you know, so we had to, like, go find it and dry it out, and she called it Apache tea. She called it, like, 2 other things too, but that was my favorite name for it. It was so good. But there was all kinds of weird stuff. There was, like, this plant that we would pick, and I know exactly what it looks like, and I've, like, gone back to it as an adult, that had these little bulbs, and if you chewed them, it made, like, a kind of chewing gum that would clean your teeth. And I was like, no wonder my grandma never had a cavity. She's, like, off chewing sap and this weird plant as a child, you know, rubbing her teeth and gums with, like, sticks that have, like, these medicinal herbs in them. So, and never had a cavity in her life. It was kind of amazing. So, yeah.
Thank you.
I think maybe it's my time. I don't know what time this panel ends, I realize, but 4:30, 4:45.
4:45.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you guys for listening to